Today's guest worked with Irv Woolsey. Irv passed recently, and he, if you don't know who he is, was the manager of George Strait, basically George's whole career. He passed at the age of 80 and has left a big hole in the heart of Nashville, and so we want to send our condolences to those that knew Irv, worked with Irv, and his family. Eddie Tidwell, our guest today, has been a legend in music publishing, has had so many cuts with so many hit artists, and he's gonna say things that I wish I knew before I ever came to Nashville. I hope you enjoy this episode. I don't want to spoil it for you, so here's my friend, Eddie Tidwell. Eddie Tidwell, a Nashville native, has been passionate about understanding the origins and stories behind songs since his early days. While studying at Middle Tennessee University, he landed an internship at the Writers Group. This opportunity brought him face-to-face with renowned songwriters like Tom Schuyler, Paul Overstreet, and Fred Knobloch. These songwriting legends became his mentors, shaping his career. With over 30 years of experience in the music industry down on Music Row, Eddie has worked for various publishing companies, always finding joy in collaborating with songwriters who he sees as the creative foundation of the industry. Currently, he serves as the Vice President of Creative Services at Wimberley Music Group, a new company founded with artist manager Irv Woolsey, who represents artists like George Strait, Leanne Womack, and more. Hello, Eddie.
Hey, Stephan.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me here. I'm tickled.
So, Eddie's not only a friend, but somewhat of a mentor, I would consider you. Just because I've gotten to know you over the years and bounce questions and ideas and things off of you. And you've set me up on co-writes, and you've been a big supporter. And
I am. That's the fun part of my job is finding talented people and hanging out with them. I mean, I don't have any talent. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a songwriter. I'm not. I realized that early on, thankfully, but I thought, well, how can I hang out with those guys? And I found the perfect job to do that. And I love meeting new people that we're going to do something.
Yeah. And the thing that you said earlier that I thought was interesting was that it's the only job I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
So you did your internship.
I did.
And then your first reel.
I did my internship, and they hired me. That was in '86. They hired me when I graduated in '87 for $100 a week. And then they were like, well, we just need you for like 3 days a week for $100 a week. I went, okay. And that company, the Writers Group that you mentioned, was bought by what was then known as Screen Gems Publishing, which is now EMI. It was like the movie company, TV company, Screen Gems. So it was being bought, and they didn't have a place for me. I was making tape copies at the time. Back then, the songs were all stored on quarter-inch reel-to-reel tapes. And my job was to take those tapes and put them on cassettes, which is what you would run around town and pitch to people.
Yeah.
But I had a friend that was working in a building next door for a company that was needing a tape copy person. So I went in and interviewed with them, and the man running the company was like, so how much are you making over there? And I said, well, I'm making $100 a week. It's just 3 days a week. He goes, $100 a week? Well, I'll hire you full-time for that. And I went, okay. And I was like, I've got a full-time job in the music business. I was like thrilled to death,
Yeah.
In the meantime, I was living with my grandmother, driving a 25-year-old pickup truck, but I was in the music business. That's all that
awesome.
mattered.
Yeah, man. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the dream.
It was the dream.
Cool.
Yeah, and I knew nobody in the music business. I had no connections at all. And, I just stuck with it and said, I'm going to do this.
That's awesome. And I met you when you were at Muy Bueno.
Muy Bueno, yes.
Down on Music Row.
Mm-hmm.
Which was started by George Strait. And
that company was started by George Strait and his manager, Irv Woolsey, right when George became a recording artist in the late 79 or so.
Okay.
They wanted to have a little publishing company, and so yeah, they were partners in that.
Okay, awesome. So before we get started, let's just talk a little bit about some of the artists you've been able to get cuts on or for? I don't know how you want to say that.
I've had cuts on Kenny Chesney and Tanya Tucker. It's hard to remember. The funny thing is like when you get in a new song, you're excited about it and you go pitch it, and once it gets cut, it's almost like, oh, okay, you're trying to find the next song to get cut.
Yeah.
And I've had cuts on Tracy Lawrence, George Strait,
Randy Travis,
Leanne Womack.
A lot of big 90s. Like,
I was fortunate enough to be around in the 90s, which was the heyday for country music and songwriting, and it was just a good time to be around because people were focused on songs. They were focused on the hooks and the craft of songwriting back then. Back then, you were able to be just a songwriter, and a lot of the artists valued songwriting, outside songwriting more back then, I believe, because a lot of the artists back then had come through the 60s and 70s, and those guys were on the road all the time. They weren't really, they knew their craft was singing, so they depended on the songwriters, and the producers in town kept up with who was writing the songs and would go and mine those songs back then.
Interesting. So you mentioned a couple terms earlier, and I think it's important because some people might not even know what these terms mean. And as we're talking, can you just briefly explain what a cut is when you say a cut?
Yeah, a cut is when you get a song recorded and it's released. A lot of times you would get a cut that never got released. So the old saying back in that day was, it's not final till it's vinyl. It's like until it made the record and got out, you didn't count.
Yeah.
But there would be a lot of songs that were in the can, as they call it.
Okay.
They would overcut, and sometimes they would come out. But it's funny. A lot of times, your friend Vince Gill was on RCA Records at one point, and he had cut several albums, and they never quite got him going. And then he went to MCA Records, had a hit. All of a sudden, RCA Records went and got all those songs in the can and tried to stick them out as new Vince Gill records.
Wow, that's funny.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So like artists can be writing, but until they, theoretically they could have singles or number ones that they've written in their catalog, but until they're somewhat proven legitimate in some way, shape, or form, or have their first single, no one is interested until they kind of have that break.
Less people are interested.
Yeah.
There's always, behind every hit artist, there's somebody who's believed in them when nobody else did.
Yeah.
And that's the key to, people ask me sometimes, like, who should I go with? Who's a good publisher? Who's a good record label? It's like, whoever believes in you. You could be at the biggest record label in town. If you don't have the people believing in you, nothing's going to happen. You got to have a voice that's there advocating for you when there's no reason to, other than they think you have the talent.
They
and
truly believe in you. Yeah, that's awesome. And then the term pitch just means what? Pitch
means basically the job of a song plugger. In those days,
plugging
is you pitch songs. You keep up with who's recording, what kind of songs they're looking for. You look for those songs in your catalog, and you go and pitch them. You pitch them to however you can get to the artist. Sometimes you get to play straight for the artist. Sometimes you play for the producer. Sometimes you give, you get a copy to the bus driver or the merch person, whoever you can get it to that you think can get to that artist. You just kind of weave around until you can, and you do that multiple ways. I mean, you don't just do one thing. You just keep hitting them as much as you can.
Yeah. So let's talk like in that 90s era, because I believe that there's so many people that call 90s music real country these days, or address the 90s as like, that was when country was really good for like maybe diehard country fans or people that grew up and their formative years were in the 90s, or even people whose parents listened to 90s music as they grew up, and maybe they're millennials or they're around my age.
Well, the 90s was kind of a heyday, and
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays, I mean, of course, I've been hearing this conversation my entire career is like, well, that's not country. But in the 90s, you had a broad range of what was country. You would have George Jones, or you'd have T. Graham Brown, or doing blues. You'd have lots of different artists doing a broad range of things. And a lot of times country music gets pigeonholed by people who've never really listened to it. They're like, oh, that's country. But if you really dig into it, it wasn't. You go back into, Conway Twitty was a rock guy. He was a rock and roll star. Or Johnny Cash. Those guys weren't hillbilly music. They were just good music that happened to tell stories about the common man.
Yeah.
I think the thing about country music as for the fans is, I think the difference between country music and maybe pop or hip hop or something is country music audiences like to look at that star and go, wow, he's like me. They see George Strait and go, he's a cowboy. He likes to get out and work on his ranch. I like to do that. Or, Merle Haggard doing working man blues. Like, yeah, there's a guy that's just like me. He goes to the job. He has a few beers. He goes home to his family. He's a good guy. Where I think in pop and rock music, you don't look at Mick Jagger and go, yeah, that guy's like me. It's like you admire the fact that they're living a lifestyle that you can't dream of. So you're living vicariously through them.
Yeah.
Or in hip hop music.
Totally.
So the audience with that is they're wanting to see something lavish, where country audiences, I think, want to see somebody and know that there's value to their life because this person is singing about it and telling you, your heartbreaks are valuable, your love is valuable, your family's, they talk about the things that are important to you and remind you that you are doing an honorable thing.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like I feel like the 90s did a great job of telling stories. Not that we don't, because the whole thing that makes country music country is that, it's really centered around a story, right? Mm-hmm. I believe that's the thing.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a story song, but there needs to be a storyline. And the trick to writing songs that people can relate to is you need to be specific enough that the song seems real, like something that's really happening, but it's got to be general enough that a lot of people can relate to it.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of songs about going back home. Well, maybe this one song's about going back home to a farm, or another song could be, going back home to a city. I'm going back to the city, and everybody can relate to going back home. That's a universal story.
Yeah.
So,
and that's why we hear a lot of home songs.
Yes.
Hometowns. Mm-hmm. John Denver, Back Home Again.
Bruce Springsteen, My Hometown.
Yeah.
That song was about him growing up in New Jersey. But when I heard that as a teenager, I'm like, I could feel that, you know. I could feel that yearning for that innocent time when you were growing up and sitting in your dad's lap behind the car.
Yeah. So it's when the listener can insert themselves in the song.
Yes.
And envision themselves and put
My
themselves.
favorite songs are when you hear something and you go, oh yeah, I've done that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've been there. Or I know somebody that's gone through that.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a few things that potential Nashville artists and people that are looking to move here would have questions about. Okay. And first off, I'll never forget, do you remember what you said to me when I asked you if I should move to Nashville?
I probably said that I never recommend anybody move to Nashville.
Yeah, that's what
and
you said.
And then I think I said, but you might ought to move here.
Yeah, that's what you said.
I don't encourage people because it's hard. And I don't encourage people because if me saying you shouldn't move to Nashville is going to keep you from moving to Nashville, then you don't want it bad enough.
Yeah.
So
So that's kind of been your answer all along, right?
Yes. And
So-
it depends on why you're wanting to move here.
Because we were talking about being a songwriter, okay? So can you move to Nashville as someone from out of state, you're young, and you just want to be a songwriter? Is there a place for you in Nashville? And how hard is it going to be for you if you don't know anybody and it's just you and you just write songs, you're not an artist? What does that look like in today's publishing world, and how has publishing changed from pitching songs to where it's at now?
I would say it's possible. It's much, much more difficult than it used to be. Tremendously more difficult, because we have gone from people looking to songwriters to bring the music, to bring the songs, to artists, writers, to all the artists who are trying to write their own songs. And there's always been artist writers, and my favorite artists growing up were artist writers, from Willie Nelson to Waylon Jennings to Lyle Lovett to Chris Christopherson. So I'm not downing people who write their own songs. Used to, I would notice an artist would get a record deal and they would come out with their debut album and it would be incredible. And then they'd come out with their second album and it wasn't quite as good. It's because they had years to write the material for that first album, and they were able to cherry pick and get the very best. Well, then they were successful. They got out on the road, they were working, and then they were trying to write for that second album, and they didn't have the time or the energy. They ended up settling for less than they would have. Mm-hmm. So it becomes very difficult as an artist to keep up the quality material, because you're very busy. You're in demand for lots of things, especially now with the internet. You know, you've got to maintain your presence at all time. You know, where before you could put out an album and tour some, but I mean, now you've got to be out there at all times.
Yeah.
You can't disappear, because they will forget about you so quickly.
Yeah. As an artist.
And
that's what the majority of publishing companies are looking to do these days.
So yeah, what I was saying, when I started, you would sign writers and have them write songs, then I would go out and pitch them to the artists. Now, and when I first started, at one point I worked for MCA Publishing, and we would have these meetings with the LA and New York and London offices, and those guys, this would have been the early 90s, didn't really understand what we did, because they didn't pitch songs. They would sign producers or artists and try to develop them and pitch them to the labels. Nashville has become more of that now. Now, publishers, especially the larger publishers, the big corporate publishers, the Sonys, EMI, Universal, are almost more of like the minor leagues for the record labels. They will find an act or a producer and kind of develop them and guide them to where they think they can pitch them to a label, and
own a percentage.
And own a percentage of that.
For a length of time, and a percentage of publishing probably, and what the artist generates revenue on, I would imagine.
Well, now we've turned into these 360 deals where some of the labels are now commanding more of the different areas where the money is generated. So, yeah. Because it costs a lot.
Yeah.
So they're willing to put out the money now to hopefully, roll the dice now and gamble and hope it'll turn into something bigger, because so many of the times you don't. So it's like your big acts are having to pay for the ones that didn't quite make it.
Yeah.
So it's a very expensive proposition. When I heard a writer here recently at a Hall of Fame dinner, I think it was Kix Brooks, maybe from Brooks and Dunn. Yeah. He met a publisher named Don Light. Don Light discovered Jimmy Buffett and published Jimmy Buffett, produced Jimmy Buffett. And he had a little publishing company. So he would sign these writers, and he'd have writers come in. He's like, I really like what you're doing. I don't have any money to pay you right now, but you can hang out here. I'll give you space to write. You can meet the other guys and maybe write with them. And he said at the end of the week that all the writers would get together and play their new songs, in kicks. He said, my songs were terrible. He said, but I would play them, and Don would go, did you see what he did in that one line? He would find something positive. He said, that kept me going. And he said, I learned from all those other guys who had been there and who had success and who saw what worked and what didn't work, and I was able to learn from them.
So let's talk about the monetization of art. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you've been in the business for a long time,
mm-hmm.
and you've seen how people can make money doing music and how they can not make money doing music.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at country radio right now, or you look at what's on Spotify on those playlists, I know that in your office you have music videos going. They're like, I don't know what channel that is.
It's on Pluto, I think. It's just...
but it's like the latest country acts. So what you see there, now if you're a new artist in sense of like you just moved to Nashville and your goal is to be able to make a living doing music, but your sound isn't like what is mainstream at the time, what would your advice to that person be?
Well, the good thing about the way you have access through the internet now is you don't need a record label to get your music out there. The bad thing about the things with the internet right now is you don't need a record label to get your music out there. The thing about a record label is they are able to put enough money and focus it in certain areas to get your attention.
Yeah.
So you can put it out yourself, but trying to get through all the other people putting things out is difficult.
Yeah.
But I think when you put it out on your own, whatever attention you can get will get the attention of the record labels. They're now letting Spotify and TikTok and YouTube, Instagram, if you get enough followers and enough of an audience, that will get the record label's attention, because then they say, oh, we can build on this. They seem to be wanting to find grassroots things that they can then build up now, instead of the old days where they would hear about some guy playing in a beer joint in Muncie, Indiana, and they'd go see him and go, oh, I think we can do, now they want to know if you have a following and how they can take that following and build it with you.
And it's interesting that you say that, because the internet has changed music, and it's changed the monetization of music.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, when you were younger, or I remember when I was younger, and you'd go look at music, or you'd go to a music store or
mm-hmm.
record store for you, and you said you would spend all day there.
Yes.
And you'd buy a record, and how much was it?
Well, I mean, when I was younger, it'd be $10 for an album, or 79 cents for a 45.
Yeah.
I'd buy a single, 45 record.
What's crazy to me is if you were to buy an album on iTunes, it would be $9.99.
It's the same price. Yeah.
Yeah. The prices haven't changed.
The prices have not changed, and again, that's something your friend Vince Gill has talked about, that the value has not increased at all. And so it's really, it used to be an old saying, it's like in the music business, you can make a killing, but you can't make a living. It's like you can hit a lick and do real well for a few years, but to spread it out over an entire lifetime, it's difficult to do. And it's becoming even more difficult right now because it's become cheap and easy.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, I would save up my money to buy my favorite artist, and I would wait. It's like, oh, they've got a new album coming out, and I was so excited, and then I would go and I would just devour it. Nowadays, you can buy anything you want for 99 cents. And, how valuable is that to you?
Yeah, or stream anything you want.
Or stream anything. It costs you nothing. So it's not like you're going to listen to that stream over and over. Because I would get an album and it would stay on my record player for weeks. I would just listen to it over and over. And now you just forget them almost.
Yeah, you wear that thing out until the songs that you didn't like probably became songs you actually liked.
Yeah.
Because you listened to it enough.
Yeah. And this really dates me. My first pickup truck had an 8-track. So you couldn't even fast forward. It's like you had to listen to the whole thing,
Yeah, I think there's something beautiful in that at the same time, artistically, because artists would put, songs in order a specific way intentionally. It's not just like let's just slap them and hit shuffle and see where they end up.
Yeah, it would be a thread that ran through the whole project.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's kind of changed about the business is, artists would look for songs that were hits. They wanted something that was going to be popular, would draw people in, but they would also cut just album cuts that they knew weren't going to be a single, but they thought there was something meaningful about that song. They would, and if you were a true fan, you would buy the whole album and you would discover these things that nobody else would know about. And it made you feel special, and they could put in songs that said something about the artist. That's something that I sometimes think we're missing now is artists need to know that. When I was in college, I learned this in an artist management class. For successful artists, they have to have something to say, the talent to say it, and they have to burn for the road. And with those little songs, you could find things that the artist had to say that may not be the universal appeal that a single would have, but it would tell you something about what was important to them.
And so, like, when it comes to some of your favorite songs that you've pitched, were they singles or were they?
No, my favorite songs were songs that weren't singles. They weren't hit songs. You knew they weren't hit songs, but they were the songs that at the end of the day, when we were sitting around, we'd like, hey, pull out that song again. And it would move you. And so one of the cool parts about plugging was, you would say, I'll just say Kenny Chesney was looking for songs. They were on up-tempo, positive songs, summertime hit singles.
Of course.
So I would go in with that, but I always had in my back pocket one song that was not that. And it would catch their attention a lot of times because they'd been hearing those all day long, and all of a sudden you hear this deep song, it would catch their attention. But you also knew that the artists, those guys appreciated the art. And I got one song cut on Kenny Chesney called Baptism that shouldn't have been a single, but it was just a powerful song, and I knew he would love it, and he was like, I'm going to cut that. And he loved it so much, he put it on his greatest hits package, even though it was never a hit. And I had one of my mentors, Al Cooley, taught me how to pitch that way. If you would sit down with an artist, you would play them what they were looking for. And then he would go, I've got this other song. I mean, you couldn't cut it. It's not what you're looking for, but I just think you'd like this song. And you'd play it for them, and they'd go, I've seen this happen a half a dozen times. Steve Warner was one of the guys that it's not a trick, so I'm not like saying we tricked Steve Warner. But it was a Dave Loggins song called Between Old and New York, and it was about an old man who cleaned up the Yankee Stadium, and he was reminiscing about old New York, the old Yankees and the new Yankees, and it was like a 4.5-minute song. So he said, you can't do this, but I know you like baseball, you'd like this song. And Steve's like, yeah, that's a cool song, but yeah, it's not going to work. And the next day he calls back, he's like, I think I can do that song, and he cut it. Again, it wasn't a single, but it was one of those proud, like, somebody appreciated the craft and they had an opportunity to put it out. You don't really have that opportunity anymore with the way the internet works and Spotify and things. But
so what would be your biggest piece of advice to someone that's looking to moving to Nashville, getting a publishing deal that will develop them as an artist? So let's say they're an artist, they write songs, they want to come to town. What would your biggest piece of advice be?
work on your craft all the time. Just always keep writing. My theory is everybody has X number of hit songs in them if they're a good songwriter, and I feel like they're spaced apart like a timeline. So the more you write, the more hits you get, and that's just a theory that kind of seems to work. Now there are writers that are complete exceptions to that, but write all the time. Play for anybody you can get to listen, and just meet as many people as you can. Listen to people that have already been there. I see a lot of people who, I know you're proud of your art and who you are, but you can always learn from somebody. And find one of the things I used to tell people, because there aren't really any good books on songwriting, but find songs that you love, songs that move you. See who wrote those songs. Find out what else those people wrote, and learn and look at how they did. Because every hit songwriter has somewhat of a style, and it may not be your style, but you can see how it's like, oh, this is what he always does here. This is how he turns the phrase here. There's
one of the things you taught me was try to reincorporate the hook throughout the song.
A song needs to have a theme that runs all the way through it, and everything needs to, we used to call it the hook. Nobody uses that word anymore, but it's the hook you hang the song on, and everything needs to come back to that hook at some point. The end of the first, maybe the first verse leads into the hook, and then the chorus slams that hook down. The second verse comes back to that hook. Your tag comes back to the hook. We're missing that a lot, and it's not that it's has to be there, but that's the art of it. I think sometimes we're losing the art.
Rick Rubin, who's one of my favorite people to listen to, just him talk about music and art. He says, consider the audience last. And I thought that was really interesting because he's coming from a place of artistic purity versus commercialism. But he says that he feels like sometimes when you go that route and you think of the audience last, it opens your creativity to potentially something that you wouldn't have done otherwise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Because the biggest hang up for me, and I think other people could relate, is when you start to get opinions from people. So let's say I sent one song that I wrote to 4 different publishers. Well, each one might say something different. Like some might say I like it, some might say it didn't hit me, some might say, oh, I think it's great, and it's just an opinion.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, one person's opinion is just an opinion, right?
Yes. I do say, when I tell you to play for as many people as you can, do that. See if any of those opinions overlap. If you have people saying the same things, like, pay attention to that. Otherwise, yeah, it's just an opinion. But if you have professional people who say the same thing, it might be something to pay attention to. Might be.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I tell writers, if there's something I don't like about a song or something that I think should be changed, I go, this is what would keep me from pitching that song. And it's up to them to change it. But if they change, and 90% of the time, they'll come back with something that they changed, and I'm like, that's better. What do you think? They're like, oh, that's much better. And the reason I say, I've had people in the past go, what makes you think you know what a hit song is? Like, well, I don't, but I play for people regularly who are up the chain and who then play for people up the chain. I know what they're going to say. If you pitch enough songs to them, you know what they're going to like, what they're not going to like. And so it's not necessarily that I know what a hit is, but the people who are in charge of making the hits, I know what they think.
Mm-hmm. And you can almost filter your pitching through the eyes of the person you're pitching to.
Yes.
And I think songwriters can do the same exact thing as they're writing songs, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. And in my case, it has been an asset and a liability as a songwriter, because I feel like you can have all these voices in your head when you're writing, and it's like, well, what would so-and-so think about this?
Yeah.
Or what would so-and-so say? And before you know it, you're creating songs not just for the sake of you doing it to create a great song, but more so because you have an idea of what that person's going to say about your song.
Yeah. You got to be careful with that. Sometimes songs are like your kids. You just got to let them be what they're going to be.
Yeah.
And you're going to love them, but some of them turn out good, some of them don't. But you still love them.
Yeah.
I can't say this as eloquently as you mentioned. One of the first people I met was a songwriter named Tom Schuyler, and I heard him do a speech one time for the Nashville Songwriters Association. And he was a songwriter, he was an artist on a label, he worked in the A&R department at a record label, he was a publisher, he had done everything successfully. And he was telling about how people moved to town to change people's lives. You know, you want to write a song that changes people's lives. He says, well, songwriters want to change people's lives, but to be a successful songwriter, you need to get a publisher. And publishers are not here to change people's lives. Publishers are here to make money. And the way publishers make money is to pitch them to record labels. Record labels aren't here to change people's lives. They're there to sell product. And the way they sell product is by promoting it at that time to radio. Radio is not here to change people's lives. They're there to sell advertising, to make money. And in this whole scheme of things, you have to remember that music changes people's lives. So you've got to have the art, and you have to have the business too. Yeah. And it all when you get it working together, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
You can make a living making art.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I've never heard that put that way, and that's beautiful, but also sad at the same time. But it kind of goes back to the idea of, you know, at the end of the day, it's the music business. Mm-hmm. And
I heard a story,
business.
It may be apocryphal, I don't know if it's not, but Van Gogh's brother, who basically had to keep him alive because Van Gogh had didn't know anything about money or anything, and his brother was a businessman, and somebody asked him a question about, you know, how does it feel, you know, your brother is an artist, you know, and you're just a businessman, and he went, business too is an art, you know. You got to have both.
Yeah. So what would you advise on the person that's moving to town that wants to go to Belmont, and they're looking to go into debt to exit Belmont with a degree that's going to put them in the music business? And they're thinking, if I go to Belmont and I get a degree in music business, I will be able to get a job. Or if I learn songwriting at Belmont, I'll be able to be a professional songwriter. Is it worth the investment to go to college to be an artist versus spending those 4 years working on being an artist? Who's going to come out ahead?
That is something I did not anticipate you asking. It's nothing.
Because you went to college.
I went to college.
And your degree.
My degree is in the music business.
And that's what you did.
I was told that it was the dumbest thing I could have done. And, you know, I've had people come to me saying, hey, my son or my nephew is wanting to go get this degree. Can you tell them not to do it? It's like, no, I'm not going to tell them not to do it. Because, you know, I didn't listen to anybody, and, you know, if they don't listen to you, they might have what it takes to make it. Belmont's a wonderful school. I'm
just using it as an example, by the way.
I
just think I put myself in the shoes of the person considering, because all these high schoolers feel the pressure of like, all right, I got to go to college now that I'm out of high school. My parents are going to help me. What should I do? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people I meet that work minimum wage jobs have a college degree, but they're not really being able to pay off, let's say, their student loan and all that. And so it's really hard. And especially in the music business, the revenue has declined so much. And those 360 deals, like you mentioned, are now in play because the artists aren't generating revenue like they were. Now you're looking at entering into an industry that has completely changed since Napster and streaming. And you're thinking, like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to go to college. How much of it is the education from college versus the natural ability and talent of the individual?
Well, I will say that nobody's ever asked me to see my transcripts. Nobody's ever cared about that, and I don't think they would now either.
Have you ever asked an artist or someone that plays, like, after they played you some songs and you thought they were good or bad, like, did you go to school?
No, that would never even cross my mind. Sometimes the school Hard Knocks just gives you the inspiration.
Yeah.
So I'm not dismissing college, because I think the wonderful thing about going to Belmont or Berkeley or any of these schools is just the value of college in any field is you meet like-minded people, and what the tide raises all ships. So you can meet people that you are like-minded and can rise up together. I know Brad Paisley and some of his buddies, that they all kind of started out, his publisher, they all met at Belmont.
I think that's the biggest asset of it is the
That
relationship.
is, but that's with any college degree.
Yeah.
If you're going into banking or finance or medical field, you meet like-minded people. So that's good.
But that's on the artist end. So let's say...
Well, I think that would be on any end.
Yeah, any end. But let's say you could go to school for songwriting, or you could go to school for, let's say, accounting and economics to really understand money. Because when you did your full circle, everybody cares about what? Money. So would it be better to be an educated artist that really understands money and how money works, or someone that just writes songs?
Or if you're a writer, you might study English. I know some artists that don't advertise the fact that they have degrees from Vanderbilt in English because they want to be known as a hillbilly artist. But
Christofferson
was a Rhodes Scholar, yeah. So I think that would help you as a songwriter, absolutely. Or if you got a music degree, would help you as a musician. But nothing beats just going out there and doing it either. I wouldn't want to do it. I wouldn't want to live, but if you just went down on Broadway and sat in and played guitar or something for tips, that's a huge education you're going to get. And you're going to meet people there too. You got to be careful because you can get sidetracked. Because the music business has a dark side.
Yeah.
So I see people falling into that sometimes. Make sure you're focused on being successful in the music business.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing beats just doing it.
Yeah.
Hanging out with people who are doing it and learning from people who do it. My degree taught me basic things, but it was really, once I got my job, it was nothing like what, the books at that time. Now it may be different now.
Yeah.
The people who are teaching now tend to be people who have been in the business, from attorneys to producers to actual songwriters.
Yeah.
So these are people who are teaching from experience rather than these books that I read, or I was supposed to have read, that didn't really, they were more, I can't remember, they weren't practical things. Yeah. And again, it's a business of knowing people. I remember I grew up in a very rural community. You either worked on a farm or in a factory. And I remember my family would see somebody who was successful and like, well, it's just because, they know people. It's who you know, and they were very defeated in that. And I was like, well, I'm going to get to know somebody. And again, I didn't know anybody in the music business, but I got to know somebody. I got to be friends with them. I got to work with my heroes. So nothing beats, even if you go to school, get out there with the people who are, don't just go to class, find people who are doing what you want to do, get to know them.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice.
And people in the music business are very friendly and giving. I've found, that they want to help you. So just find the right people and just study what they do.
Yeah. So as an artist, you want to move to Nashville. You might go to college, you might not, but at the end of the day, it's the relationships. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yes, and when I was talking about, just meet people, like if somebody calls me and says, hey, can I come play you some songs? I'm like, I don't have time. I don't, it's just our company policy. I can't just do that.
And I don't take outside songs.
I don't take outside songs. But if one of my buddies said, hey, I met this guy the other night, and I think he's kind of good, I'm like, yeah, have him call me. The way I met you was basically through another publisher who had me listen to some of your songs, and I was like, I'd listen to the thing that this was where I would listen to about 8 or 10 writers a night in 15-minute things, and they aren't very good. And when I heard you, I was like, wow, you really stood out. And then, when you came to town, I was like, well, I'd introduce you to somebody and have you write with a few people. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but at least, everybody will listen to somebody they value, whose opinion they value, says to listen to them. So that's it. The more people you meet, the more likely you are to impress somebody who will then lead you down the path.
Yeah. So for the person that wants to meet a publisher, because most, if not all publishers I could possibly think of don't take, nor labels take outside songs because they'd be inundated with a ridiculous amount of music, most of it that would probably, as you said, maybe not be very good. How does someone break into their first meeting with a publisher?
Again, I think it would be meeting other writers. If you're a writer or if you're an artist, play anywhere you can for as many people as you can, and somebody will find you. I believe, I used to say this about songs, but it's probably artists too. It's like, I don't think you can hide a hit somebody's going to find that song because they're desperate for them. If you're a talented artist, somebody's going to find you. You just have to be willing to put yourself out there. So if it's playing down on Broadway or if it's playing, just find some place to play. And it's, it's hard to do that in Nashville because you can't make any money playing. So there's, we used to always say about paying your dues. And I know it sounds terrible, but you're going to have to just do that to be heard.
A lot of people say it's a 10-year town. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a 5-year town, 5 to 10 years. 5 years of, when I say 5 years, it's 5 years to get something started. So probably 10 years to actually be successful to some degree, probably. And that's not people intentionally trying to hold you down. That's just from over the years, that's what it looks like it takes. It takes that long to meet people, to just move around and find the people, again, that believe in you.
Yeah.
And just make friends with people. People like to do things with their friends. They like to make their friends successful. So that's another thing. I see people who are a bit over eager sometimes when they meet somebody. Don't hit somebody up and say, hey, I got 50 songs here if you listen to. It's like, hey, would you listen to a song sometime? And I go, yeah, I'll do that. But don't treat every opportunity as like your last opportunity. Just try to stay in the circles.
So last few questions. You're on a desert island, top album that you have to take with you.
Just one?
Yeah.
Ooh. Maybe Eagles' Greatest Hits, the first one.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Mine's volume 2. Yours is volume 1.
Yeah.
That's funny. I just bought that on vinyl.
Well, we'll have to get stranded together.
Yeah, I guess so. Then we'll have one greatest hits. Okay, so if you want to make money in music and you want to do it for a career, the biggest thing is touring, right?
Yes, artists, the publishing numbers, because there are no album sales anymore. Used to, you knew how much, you could see how many albums sold and you knew exactly how much you were going to make. Now with streaming, you have no idea what you're going to do. So artists are touring. That's where they make the bulk of their money, yes.
I just saw a video of Snoop Dogg, and he was talking about he got a phone call and was told that he just hit 1 billion streams on Spotify.
Uh-huh.
And he was like, how much money did I make? And they were like, less than 45 grand.
Yeah.
For 1 billion spends on, and on Spotify now, I believe they have to listen for 30 seconds for it to be counted as a spin. So that to me is just atrocious on a level, because
it is atrocious. I mean, you look at sometimes you look at people in the music business, and there is greed, just like there is in any business. But for your everyday artist, mid-level artist, and songwriter, it's difficult to make a living now because of that.
Yeah.
I had artists or writers in the past who never had big singles, but they would be on a platinum album, 1 or 2 a year. And at that time, if you had a song on a platinum album, it was $90,000, 9 cents a copy. So roughly $100,000 that then would be split with a publisher. You do a couple of those a year, you can make a nice living. You're not going to be living in a mansion, but you can make a living like a normal person doing a normal job. Mm-hmm. You can't do that anymore.
Yeah. What is a draw, and what could be expected for a first-time songwriter on a draw?
A draw is an advance that publishers make to a writer, and record labels. I'm not sure if they used to do that to artists. I'm not sure they do that anymore. If they do, it's not as much. But a draw is an amount of money we give you to kind of free up your time to give you more time to write. In the past, they were able to give you enough that maybe you didn't have to have a job. This would be your job, but you were expected to come in every single day and write songs. Because the money's gotten so low, it's difficult to give somebody a draw now that will make them completely completely free of being able to work at least part-time.
Yeah.
Nowadays, a beginning draw for a writer would be, anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000 a year. Now, if you're an artist and you get a record deal, you can get a lot more than that for a little while.
But it's a big loan.
But it's a big loan. It's a very big loan.
And it's recoupable.
It's completely recoupable.
Which means what?
Which means before you make money, the publisher gets their money first. And once the publisher is paid back, then they start giving you your share or your half.
So let's say you got $25,000 a year. You're a full-time writer, but you have to work a night shift doing something. You wait tables, but you write a certain amount of songs. You turn them in, and let's say you get a cut, and it's on someone's record, and it's not the hit, but money trickles in, but it trickles in off streams. Mm-hmm. So on the Snoop Dogg thing, if I was to do the math right, and you cut that 40 $5,000 down to 22, that would be half a billion streams to recoup.
Yeah, before you would start seeing any additional
off of
money.
streaming.
Off streaming.
Unless it's a single, which is where the money's at in songwriting.
Yes.
Is radio.
Yes.
So that's really what you have to have is singles if you want to be making good money as a songwriter.
Yeah, it's still difficult. The thing about streaming is it works for the artist. If you're an artist, you can do well with the streaming. They just haven't fixed it to where the songwriters and the publishers are making what they probably should be, as compared to the old days. Like when you had an album, you knew how much, one unit was worth this much money to the label, it's worth this much money to the publishers. Now with downloading and streaming, the labels it works okay with. It's actually kind of good for them because they have no product to ship or to manufacture, no returns. But it hasn't quite come down to the publishers and writers yet. It's getting a little better. The new Copyright Monetization Act has helped some because it's really difficult now to put something online without permission and without credit being given to the writers, and the money can get to the writer much easier. It's harder for somebody to steal or use your songs without your permission. But when the money does come in, it's still very little.
Yeah. What I think would be cool is if, like, on Amazon Prime, when a new movie comes out, they charge you, it's like $19.99 to watch the movie. And then over time, it goes down to a rent price, which is like $5.99, $4.99. And then eventually, it becomes part of the Prime catalog. But I think something like that in the music business, where on streaming services, if you want to listen to the new whatever record, Chris Stapleton record, you have to spend $12.99 if you want access to it immediately. Something like that.
Something like
There's
that. I think
be
that would be
something
great, but we've gotten so spoiled. I don't know.
Yeah.
We've gotten into the mindset that music is free. I've gotten into the mindset that news is free. It's like, I don't want to pay the New York Times.
Paper.
Yeah, I'm not paying for that. And I'll move around till I can find the story for free.
Yeah. Because they want you to subscribe when you go to the website.
Yeah, so, we're all guilty of that. It's just the way that it is. We come to think of information as free, and it costs money, any type of information, whether it's art or news or...
And news, to me, like journalism is an art.
Journalism is an art, and it's dead.
Yeah.
It's worse than the music. Those writers really don't have an outlet.
Yeah, the Writers Guild went on strike.
Yeah.
Because now of streaming of television, you go to a movie theater, there's nobody sitting in the movie theaters anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing's changed because of the access.
Right.
And so something's going to change. It's just, what is it? Who knows? We don't know.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you.
Come up with that, though.
Yeah, I'll get to thinking.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I've enjoyed this tremendously. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it helps people, because that's my goal, is that this podcast can help and educate, and a lot of people that don't know, maybe behind the curtain a little bit of what the realities are, the pros and cons of pursuing a career in the music business.
Don't not do it. Do what you love. If you love it, do it. But be prepared.
Thanks for hanging out with me and Eddie. That was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed talking to Eddie and getting his insight. Please hit subscribe, again, follow, share it with your friends, put it in your Instagram story. Come over to my Instagram at Stephan Hogan and find one of the vertical videos or reels that we posted with Eddie and give it a share, because he is just such a wealth of knowledge and people need to know this information from this episode. So thanks again for listening, for subscribing, and a new episode will be out every Monday.